Welcome. This is the Desert Blockchain monthly session on Wednesday, November the 17th, 2021. It is 7 p.m. Arizona time. I will stop the screen share. And my name is Jay Carpenter. I'm founder of Desert Blockchain. And we have our monthly sessions generally on the fourth Wednesday of every month. But since Thanksgiving is next week, this is the third Wednesday. And our sessions are for about an hour, and we cover a variety of topics on Web 3.0 and decentralization and so forth. And you're welcome to join us if you're a Desert Blockchain citizen. It's $10 a month via Patreon. And basically, we are completely community supported. We don't generally take sponsorships, although we did take one sponsorship last month for cybersecurity, which is our topic this evening. But basically, we appreciate your community support via the Patreon, $10 per month. And we're planning some interesting benefits that will be part of a prototyping process. And if you join, you're kind of putting your stake in the ground for your priority for some of that prototyping. So we are also live streaming, and I am watching the live stream on YouTube. And if you have any questions, please put those questions in the chat on the right, and I will answer them as we go forward. And we have Jem Genthner here joining us, who's a Desert Blockchain citizen. And feel free to jump in anytime. I would like to make this kind of a conversation. I have a presentation that I'll start in just a moment, but the topic of cybersecurity, I think, is really, really important right now. And with Web 3.0 and decentralization, I think we've got some really interesting opportunities, and we're going to cover that tonight. So I don't see any questions in the YouTube live stream chat. We've got a few people watching. Jem, do you have any questions before we get started?
Oh, no, not right now, Jay.
Okay, great. All right, let me switch over here to full screen. Bear with me just a moment, and we'll jump into the presentation. My computer's running a little slow, got a bunch of things going on here. So I did just announce, while I'm waiting for this to load, the presentation to load, our session for December, which will be on December 22nd, and it will be a review of 2021 and a forecast of 2022 for decentralization, Web 3.0, and so forth. So my presentation's still loading. Thanks for bearing with me. And we do have some folks on the YouTube live stream. Okay, let's give this a shot. So, all right. Okay, hopefully you can see that. So we're going to be talking about cybersecurity and Web 3.0. And I really think we're in a new realm because of decentralization. It's a radically different construct from the centralized network and ecosystem that we've been used to. So here's some of the topics we're going to cover tonight. We'll cover cyber ownership, which I think is a critical part that I'm not sure people really fully appreciate cyber ownership and what it really means. Excuse me. We'll talk about centralized cybersecurity, decentralized cybersecurity, trust, what's working, what's missing, collaboration. I've got an image I love to share with folks, and it's about Black Bart, and it's kind of funny. And then we'll talk about a recycling example and some what I'll call a sewage example, and then some opportunities, and that will basically take care of it for tonight. So the first thing is ownership. And there's a term in cybersecurity called pwn. And if you get pwned, what it actually means is that someone has gotten into your network and they dominate in such a fashion as to gain ownership. A network system, organization, or rival that comes under adversaries' control is said to have been pwned. And pwned, I don't know what the source of the term is, but it has connotations of own. And we hear about cyber breaches daily, but I think what people don't quite realize is that when somebody gets into a network and is able to take control of that network, they own the network. And it would be just as if you gave the keys to your car to somebody else, and you might be able to ride in the car, you might even be able to get in the car and start it up, but somebody else ultimately owns your car. And the same thing is true with networks when they've been pwned, or when your laptop's been pwned, or you've suffered a ransomware attack. Somebody else controls and owns your network. And I ask you to think about that for just a moment. Think about all the millions of dollars, billions of dollars that's invested in networks throughout our lives. And this, this wasn't as important 20 years ago, but now everything is networked together. And when there's a breach like this, and somebody basically has gotten control of a network, they own it. And unless you can figure out a way to turn back the clock, restore from a backup, burn down your network, you're not going to be sure that you own that network anymore. So that's just kind of a something I ask you keep in mind as we go through some of these components. So here's something from Ledger, which is a hardware device for keeping your private keys and so forth. And there's a saying that goes along with this pwn term, I think, quite nicely. And the saying is, if it's not your keys, it's not your coins. It's that simple. And basically, this is really, really critical, because people that purchase their cryptocurrency and so forth through exchanges, from this view, this context, you don't actually own your cryptocurrency. The private keys to that cryptocurrency is owned by the exchange. And that's a really critical point that this particular phrase means and indicates and elaborates upon. So not only is it your network, and you could say, if you don't control the keys to your network, the passwords and so forth, then it's not your network. And the same thing goes with your cryptocurrency. And you might expand that to other things, your data, the Internet of Things, your cameras, all that stuff. If you don't control the passwords and the access to those items, you don't own it anymore. And it can happen as quickly as somebody pressing a spamming email, a phishing email, and voila, all of a sudden you don't own your network, which is really, really scary to me. So here's some more elaboration on this idea of not your keys, not your coins. And it's talking about private keys associated with your funds. It goes into the ownership issue here, and it talks about the implications of this idea of if you don't control your private keys, you don't actually own whatever your asset is or whatever your data is. So here's a little more elaboration on that. I won't they say it much better than I can, but I recommend that you review this and read it, when this presentation is available to all, which will be tomorrow morning. So basically, here's a fundamental diagram, and this is from some time ago, about the fundamental nature of the networks that we're talking about, and particularly in cybersecurity. So we've lived through decades of having centralized networks. And whenever you've got a centralized network, you're much closer to that concept that we just talked about, which is, not your keys, not your coins, or being pwned. Basically, within that centralized network, you're sort of like a tenant. You're sort of like in an apartment renter. You don't actually own the building that you're in. It's owned by some sort of centralized entity that you're basically just using based upon their permission. Something that's a little more decentralized is the middle image of decentralization. But really what we're talking about with blockchain and Web 3.0 is much, much closer to the third network diagram, which is distributed, meaning that it's completely peer-to-peer. All peers are equal. There is no centralized entity that controls, that basically is just giving you rights to the network. You are on an equal status with all others, and this is basically what's called permissionless, generally, network architecture. And that's a critical part in what we're going to be looking at tonight on cybersecurity and Web 3.0. So let's go on to the next. Okay, if you do anything out of tonight, I recommend you watch this talk by Thomas E. Ricks, who's a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist. And he gave this talk, I believe, in 2015 at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at ASU. And it's a little bit long, but it was so foresighted in what he's talking about. He's basically saying that our military, our defenses, all of our security has been designed for the last war that we fought. So all of our military spending, and you can actually extrapolate this into our network designs as well. It's generally designed to protect against what happened in the past. And what he says in this talk is that we are not operating in the past. And in this talk, he says that an aircraft carrier is like a big kick me sign sitting out in the middle of the Mediterranean Ocean. It's just a target, basically. And he also says that what we should be teaching our cadets in the military academy is coding, is network management, is cybersecurity, as well as multiple languages. And he's basically saying that that's where the war is happening. And from my view, he is dead on right that basically our defenses right now should be in the cyberspace. And that's really where the control is. And anybody in the world can participate on that battlefield. So, I think this is a really, really great talk. He also talks about, and this, keep in mind, this is 6 years ago. He talks about how we have been losing the war in Afghanistan to basically what he considers a ragtag army that, I think he uses the term, makes the folks in the movie Deliverance, which was Appalachian hillbillies, look like George Clooney. And I think he's dead on. So this is another dimension to keep in mind as we go through some of these comparisons between centralized network architecture and cybersecurity and decentralized network or distributed network architecture and cybersecurity. So we don't have to look any further than what was disclosed a little less than a year ago, which was the SolarWinds breach. And this was called a supply chain breach. And if you're not familiar with this was disclosed, I think, in December of 2020. But basically, it was kind of uncovered by happenstance that SolarWinds, which was a network provider, and I believe they were providing all sorts of services partially related to cybersecurity, somebody had hacked into the SolarWinds system and started adding malware to their updates. So imagine that as you're updating your computer, your laptop, if you've got Windows, you're getting updates all the time. You're actually not only loading the newer software, you're also loading in access to your laptop, your network, by some sort of adversary who it's been attributed to the Russians, but I don't think we're really sure who was successfully launched this breach. And from what I know, it might have been multiple actors that actually were part of this SolarWinds breach. But circling back to the first slide, the pwn, basically thousands and thousands, I think it's at least 18,000 networks and maybe more, basically lost control of their networks. And they don't necessarily know it yet. It's just like somebody has taken the key to their house and is sitting there with a key. Even though you're able to get in and out of your house, you don't own your house anymore. So that's the magnitude of the SolarWinds breach. So here is an article, I think from the Denver Post, and this is echoed by some of the top cybersecurity experts like Bruce Schneier and others. But basically, Bruce Schneier was saying that when this type of breach happens, the SolarWinds, and somebody's gotten that deeply into your network, the only thing you can do to really be sure that you've gotten rid of this intruder is to burn down your network. You've got to completely wipe it out and start from scratch. And I'm guessing that most of the networks that are infected by the SolarWinds breach have not done that. That's incredibly disruptive. So you can read through this, but here's yet another breach that just happened within the last week. But apparently somebody's figured out how to get into the Azure cloud system, and basically, from what I know, and I'm not a total expert in this particular breach or any other breach for that matter, but apparently they can just travel throughout the Azure cloud and basically, have control of that. Extremely concerning. So here's an article, and we won't go into this a whole lot, but it basically just highlights some of the potential use cases for blockchain technology for cybersecurity and so forth. And you can take a look at that at your leisure, and that was from July of 2021. So let's talk about the magnitude of cybercrime tools and stolen data. And this is from RAND Corporation, which is a think tank, one of the leading think tanks in the world. And it's actually kind of dated. It's from 2014, but it talks about the market for cybercrime tools. So there's the biggest takeaway from this particular article is that there's a ton of money in cybercrime tools, breaches, zero-day exploits, and so forth. And this item goes into, some of those dimensions of the economic vector that's pushing these breaches. And it's not only by, your garden variety criminal, but it's also by state actors are in the game. And this is one of the most startling items out of this. And again, keep in mind, this is 2014, but the cyber black market for these cyber tools, cyber breaches, and so forth can be more profitable than the illegal drug trade. I mean, think about it. If you've got a laptop, pretty much anywhere in the world, and you have the skill set, you can break into various networks, take control of those networks, set off malware, ransomware, whatever, and you can extort substantial amounts of money without touching a single molecule, like you have to do with the drug trade. So wherever this market, the black market, was in 2014, you can be sure that it's much, much greater now. So here's some recommendations. I think these are fall short, frankly, but shifting the approaches to thwarting attackers, bug bounties, and we'll talk a little bit about that, and maybe some next generation bug bounties, fake credit cards to, sort of salt the data sets so that you can track and hopefully identify who the attackers were. So I won't go through all of these, trying to disrupt black market operations and, other things. I think that, trying to apply the techniques that have been used to try to combat the drug markets and the arms merchants, all of those things. But I think we're going to need something much, much stronger than these particular items in order to really do a significant dent in what's taking place with cybersecurity and breaches and so forth. So here's a little illustration for you. And this is kind of the way that I like to think about the current state of cybersecurity, one of the dimensions of the current state of cybersecurity, because we all hear about, okay, we get these messages saying, okay, don't click on these links, change your password, update your firewalls, all that sort of thing. Great. But that, in my view, is about as effective as our instructions for recycling versus trash. And if you just think about that, the current cybersecurity directives are comparable, in my view, to saying, okay, take all your banana peels and other trash and put it in the gray can. Don't put it in the blue can that's got the arrows marked on it. All right, well, great. Well, if everybody follows that directive, then we're all good and everything's fine and copacetic and we're all safe, right? But how realistic is that? First of all, people, including me, and I'm speaking firsthand, I don't know what goes in the recycling can or what's supposed to. So I'm not totally sure. I'm not even sure that the recycling is recycled anymore. Great, but sometimes I'm in a hurry. I've got something in my hand and I drop it into the recycling can. I'm guilty. All right. So what happens if we take the banana peel and we put it into, in an analogy fashion, if we drop the banana peel into the recycling can, all of a sudden we have a breach. And that's all it takes, is one banana peel in this context, in the cybersecurity context, one banana peel in the recycling can and the entire system is compromised. That is really, really scary. And that hopefully this analogy to recycling versus trash highlights, in my view, the impossibility of, having this sterile antiseptic network policies and so forth. But that's the state, in my view, of Web 2.0 centralized cybersecurity. Is if we would all just put the banana peels in the gray can instead of the blue can, we'd be safe. Not likely. And also, just in terms of recycling, it's voluntary generally. There is no monetary incentive to follow the rules. You're basically asked to follow these rules just to be kind of like a good citizen. Well, one of the things we're going to look at tonight is, what if there were monetary incentives designed to combat the monetary incentives that are going on the hacker side? What if we had a new set of monetary incentives that basically created market incentives to follow better cybersecurity, better policy rules? Something akin to this. If we had the old 10-cent deposit on bottles and aluminum cans and so forth, now all of a sudden you've got a market vector to encourage people to actually go through and sort through the trash can and put the recyclables into the blue can for recycling and so forth. So it's just a model to sort of set the tone for what might be possible, particularly in the Web 3.0 realm. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we move forward. So here's yet another analogy. And the analogy is this: when we rely upon centralized constructs to watch out for our interests, it's very much akin to turning on a tap in any home or wherever and filling your glass with water. You're basically relying upon the integrity of the water treatment system, this centralized construct where the water is supposedly being treated to meet whatever the parameters are. Basically, you've turned over a part of your safety and self-interest to a centralized construct. Nothing wrong with that. It's just starts from a foundation of trust and is susceptible to being corrupted and becoming a system of distrust. If something all of a sudden were compromised at that water treatment plant to the right. In the decentralized web, the trust vector works this way. We are responsible for our own trust. It's like having this filtering system that you're running whatever through in order to produce a clean glass of water. And it's designed so that you assume that wherever you're getting this liquid or semi-liquid is completely corrupted, completely untrustworthy, like the mess that's on the right-hand side. So that's a critical element to the decentralized world, the decentralized Web 3.0, that, in my view, is far superior. This is what I would rather serve my family, a glass of water from this filtered device, than always relying upon this. Now, in reality, I don't do that, but this is sort of an analogy to what we're dealing with decentralized trust. We start with distrust, and from the distrust arises trust. And it's because we have control to question anything at any time and take the initiative to look out for our own best interests. So hopefully that communicates. So going back to the centralized constructs, here's basically what the state of Web 2.0 centralized cybersecurity looks like in my view. And again, this is Jay Carpenter's opinion. But basically, the state of cybersecurity in networks today that are centralized is basically a CYA checklist. And you'll have to look up CYA if you want to find out what that means. But I don't think anybody really in cybersecurity expects that they're going to be able to set their networks up in a centralized fashion that is immune or hardened to attacks. It's basically, we're just going to go through these checklists. We're going to have a record of our checklists. And, when something happens, because it will happen, then we'll be able to produce the checklist and say, well, look, we did everything we could, and it was still breached. And you can look through this checklist and you can basically see that it's the typical thing that I was talking about with the recycling and the trash cans, which is if everybody would just follow this, they wouldn't click on phishing emails, they would change their password or create a password policy, didn't have their password on a sticky note on the screen of their computer, then we would all be safe if we all had, reliable backups and all that sort of thing. Just in my view, it's as realistic as getting everybody to put their banana peels in the gray can instead of the blue can. So here's another dimension that I think is an opportunity in the Web 3.0 space, because we have this tension whenever we're dealing with networks. And the tension is this. The tension is that for cyber safety and security, when we're dealing with computer networks, we're dealing in a machine-friendly environment. And it's illustrated by this, which I highly recommend you click through this Blockchain 101 website where you can explore how the blockchain works and so forth. But the point is that machines are friendly and like that long string of gobbledygook at the bottom, which is called a SHA-256 hash. So if you take the name Mary, which you can barely see in the next to the data item there, it's all in all caps, and you run that through this algorithm, this hashing algorithm for cryptography called SHA-256, you come up with this unique string that that tells you that you are that string represents the word Mary in all caps. Okay, so that's great if you're a computer dealing with zeros and ones, but if you're a human, you prefer the all caps Mary to the right. And this tension between machine friendly and human friendly is at the crux of the source of part of the reason that we have these breachable networks. The machines do great with these long, funny strings. We need something that's familiar. And even the word Mary in all caps is not as human friendly as this, which is an image. It's an image of Mary Poppins to be exact. And when you see that, all of a sudden, there's a whole world that opens up. You might remember when you saw the movie Mary Poppins, you might have a warm, fuzzy feeling, all that sort of thing that is completely void in the machine world. So this tension between machine friendly and human friendly is a collision point in making our networks safe and secure. But I think it's an opportunity point for Web 3.0 and an opportunity for innovation. So here's another example of that same phenomena. Generally, in the centralized networks, we rely upon pretty much perimeter security. In decentralized networks, it's much more analogous to a warship like an aircraft carrier, where if you go into an aircraft carrier, it is sliced and diced into very small compartments. So it's designed to take a some sort of attack on any part of the ship and not sink, because you're going to fill up, X amount of small compartment rooms with water, but you're not going to sink the entire aircraft carrier. Not so with a yacht on the left-hand side. The yacht, if you breach a hole in that yacht, all of a sudden you're going to have a new water feature in your luxury living room. And that thing is not going to stay afloat very long. But, this illustrates another dimension of tension between, human friendly and machine friendly. The machine friendly in this case is much more like the aircraft carrier. The human friendly is much more like the yacht. We want to get, if you happen to get on a yacht, you want it to be very luxurious, very comfortable, easy to move around and so forth. But that is 180 degrees counter to that yacht being able to stay afloat if there's some sort of attack on it. The exact opposite is the case with the aircraft carrier, where if you get below deck on an aircraft carrier, and this actually happened to me, and I flew on the USS John C. Stennis as it was coming into San Diego, went into a pilot's room. I didn't pay attention. That was a big mistake. I started wandering around the ship, got completely lost because it's totally chopped up into these very small rooms, which is designed to withstand attack. So something to keep in mind as you're, looking at the overall centralized web versus the decentralized web. So here's the Black Bart example. One of the things that's missing is this disparity between the economic incentives that exist on the attacker side versus the economic incentives that exist on the defender side. So in this case, this is an old illustration, but you see you've got Black Bart there and getting ready to get a shave with the barber with the razor in his hand. And there on the wall is a reward of $5,000 for Black Bart, dead or alive. Now, Black Bart knows this, and he's got his hand on his pistol, and the barber is standing there, looking rather torn as to what to do. But this is an example of what a new vista that I think is opening up with the Decentralized Web 3.0, where we have an opportunity to deploy and engage some economic incentives that starts to tip the scales back to the defender side versus the huge economic incentives that exist on the attacker side. So where is the hope? Well, this is an example. This is a TED Talk by Juan Benet, who's the founder of IPFS. And it's from 2016. Highly recommend you take a look at it. And you'll notice that Juan is wearing a t-shirt with that distributed web architecture image on it. And, that's obviously no accident. But he talks about the interplanetary file system and how it is designed to be much more robust, much more resilient than centralized constructs that we've used in the past. So here is the website for IPFS. And by the way, in Digital Blockchain community, we have explored IPFS almost since the inception rather. And we run IPFS on a network of small board computers called Raspberry Pis. And if you go to our Desert Blockchain camp, we have Raspberry Pis running IPFS, and we experiment with those and use those. So, and we do have a session coming up this Saturday, by the way. So why is this important? Well, this is important because IPFS, the Interplanetary File System, which is a completely peer-to-peer, distributed network, has withstood state-level attacks. So here's an article, I think it was 2017, May 2017, where Turkey was going through some sort of political turmoil. They actually took down the Turkish Wikipedia system. The government took it down because they didn't want the citizens posting and communicating and putting things on the Turkish Wikipedia area. Well, the team at Protocol Labs using IPFS actually restored the Turkish Wikipedia on IPFS, and it withstood the attempts by the Turkish government to take it down. So that, in my mind, is a pretty strong cybersecurity red team, blue team exercise in real life, where you've got a state level actor that's trying to defeat a distributed system like IPFS. Now, Turkey's not the only one. This is from the Observer saying Turkey can't block this copy of Wikipedia. Spain did the same thing. And I can't remember exactly when this was, but there was some sort of political upheaval between the government of Spain and I think it was Catalonia. And again, IPFS, the Interplanetary File System, was used to restore the ability of, the Catalonia, movement to communicate, exchange data, and so forth. So that, again, I think is pretty strong. Now, the same thing holds true with China. So China, now you've got a state-level superpower that is working to defeat a decentralized construct like IPFS. Now, I'm not quite sure how successful that's been, and I've noted some links and things that you can research it if you're interested, but it's pretty strong. They have, to my knowledge, China has not been able to totally defeat the IPFS network. And IPFS and their coin called Filecoin is extremely popular in China. So that brings me to the next item, which is that this is as of September 24th. China announced that they were going to ban crypto trading, mining, and Bitcoin did take a tumble at that point. But if you know what's happened since then, Bitcoin has regained all the lost value and achieved record levels or near record levels. So in my mind, what that's saying to me is that even a superpower as strong as China is not going to be able to defeat Bitcoin, some of the cryptocurrencies, the blockchains, and so forth. I could be wrong. The jury's still out, but it's not just China. Basically, if you look at the market value of Bitcoin, if Jay or Jim could come up with a way to defeat Bitcoin, we could become trillionaires instantly, because we could short Bitcoin and defeat it and buy it at zero, sell it at 65,000 or wherever it's at today. So all of this, in my mind, speaks to the robust nature of decentralization, decentralized Web 3.0, blockchain, distributed networks, and so forth. So looking for questions in the chat. This is just a little observation from my part, which is, the difference between closed source and open source. If you're trying to secure your closed source proprietary software, it's like proofreading your own term paper. It doesn't work. You're not gonna, in my view, this is my opinion, you're not gonna be able to test all the different contexts that the open world is gonna throw at open source software and open source constructs. So that's just kind of a side note on the robust nature of open source versus closed source and proprietary software. Again, this is a little bit redundant, but the thing to keep in mind is that with decentralized web and decentralized constructs, you're starting from an adversarial foundation. With centralized and closed constructs, you're starting from a foundation of trust, and generally there's some sort of custodial relationship that you have with those centralized constructs. And this is a critical factor to keep in mind, especially in the realm of, the robustness in cybersecurity. So let's get into some more interesting things. What does Web 3.0 open up in terms of opportunities? Well, here is a paper, and this is from 2013, and it really hasn't gotten traction, but I think it's, and I'll go into a few reasons why, but this is a really, really interesting way to sort of fight fire with fire, where you're pitting a market against a blue team market against a red team market, basically. But this proposal is, and this paper is about standing up a prediction market that is like a betting market on cybersecurity breaches. So the way this would work is, let's imagine that you've got this prediction market, a betting market, and I could put down maybe $100 or something like that, that there would be or there would not be a major cybersecurity breach in the month of January 2022. So all the bettors, all the speculators could participate in this market. All the inside information theoretically would start to show up in this market, and you could follow the price of a major security breach in January 2022, and it would start to be like a barometer of, is there something at play? Is there something under foot to breach the market in general, or it could be individual companies, it could be governments, whatever. But basically it would be a way for, if somebody's planning a breach or a cyber attack on a company or a government or whatever, whoever's doing that, whoever would have inside information, would be able to make additional money via the prediction market. So now all of a sudden, the premise of this is you've got this price barometer that starts to hint at pending cyber attacks and cyber breaches and so forth. I think that's really, really interesting. And we're going to talk about decentralized identity, but I believe, in my view, one of the reasons that this has not gotten more momentum is because one of the missing pieces for Web 3.0 cybersecurity and some of the things we're talking about is we don't have a workable decentralized identity structure at this point. So here's another key piece to workable cybersecurity, and this speaks to that machine-friendly versus human-friendly area that I think is a big opportunity for innovation, which is, and this is by Vitalik Buterin, the founder of Ethereum, But this is a paper that, and this is from January 2021, that lays out, why we need social recovery wallets and social recovery in general. And basically, and I've got another piece on this, but we don't have a customer service department for decentralized constructs, where if you lose those private keys or something happens to you and you can't act on your own behalf, we don't have a workable social recovery structure in place. And we really need that if this decentralized realm is going to go mainstream, and we're going to kind of wean ourselves off of the centralized exchanges and so forth that, again, hold the private keys and really control your money and your cryptocurrency. So this is an area I think, for innovation, a workable social recovery structure, along with the possible prediction markets and market mechanisms to counter the market mechanism that's in place for the incentives for the hackers and the attacks. So, and this is just a little bit of a, to further illustrate, there is no 1-800 toll-free number for Bitcoin. You're out of luck if you lose your private keys. Okay, so I talked about decentralized identity. This, in my view, is like the holy grail. And this is the GSMA, which is a mobile telephony consortium and so forth. But it talks about some of the initiatives that are underway with the W3C and the Decentralized Identity Foundation. I've been involved with some of these organizations. In my view, they are pursuing a path that won't work. And the reason is because they're relying upon attestation in order to be the founding mechanism or the fundamental foundation for establishing decentralized identity. The other, my other little soapbox and editorial or op-ed piece is that the W3C standards are horribly complex and, basically unlikely to be workable or scalable. And if you think that that's crazy, Jay, how could that be? You've got all these geniuses, engineering geniuses around the world in the W3C and IETF and all this stuff. Well, you don't have to look any further than IPv4 versus IPv6. The same folks, almost the same folks, came up with this construct for the next generation of internet protocol addressing, which is IPv6. And after 15, maybe 20 years, it's got maybe 10 or 15% of the market usage. And the reason is because it really doesn't take into account the human usability nature of internet protocol addressing and so forth. So that's my little soapbox talk on decentralized identity and the current approaches that are underway to create decentralized identity. And I think believe me, the stakes are incredibly high. The players that are trying to solve decentralized identity are the largest players in the world. And it's really a critical piece for many dimensions. So here's something that I just put a line in. I don't really have a good resource for this, but the idea is that if you go back to that Black Bart image, if we had a way for collecting that reward on Black Bart that was anonymous, that could be verified, that is a really powerful tool to basically turn hackers against other hackers. So if you could imagine trying to launch an attack, a dark web attack or whatever, And now you can collaborate with other, hackers. If there was a way for those hackers to turn the other hackers in and collect an anonymous reward, I think we would see a whole new dimension for stemming cyber attacks. But that's going to take, again, the decentralized identity and a whole new construct. It doesn't do you any good as a black hat hacker to turn in your teammates if you collect the reward and you can't live to spend it. So that's one of the dimensions of this idea of being able to collect anonymous rewards for turning in your fellow black hat hackers. Okay, so what's missing? Workable decentralized identity, social recovery. All right, that's about the extent of my little rant. I'll take it off a screen share. The rest of this is a little bio on me, the way to contact me, and so forth. So we'll take it off a screen share, and hopefully that made sense. Randy's joined us, Jim. Any questions or comments that either of you have on those items?
Well, Jay, when I looked at the pre-talk materials, didn't you have a suggested a solution for the decentralized identity?
I do have a suggestion for the decentralized identity, and I'm part of a team that's working on that, and hopefully we will have a prototype for that in the not too distant future, basically. But I think there's a radically different approach to establishing decentralized identity that instead of coming from this trusted basis of attestation where, Jay vouches for Jim's identity and Jim vouches for Jay's, I think it's going to require an adversarial approach where there's a period of contesting identity and claims to identity and dispute resolution, basically. So I don't know if that answers your question totally, but yes, I and a small group of others are working on something that hopefully we can demonstrate in the not too distant future, basically.
Interesting, because I agree with you. This is really a critical piece.
Yeah. I think so too. I mean, hardly a day goes by that we don't hear about another breach, and we really don't know who owns our networks and our information anymore. So yeah. All right, I'm looking at someone, Alex asks in the chat, how big's your organization? Well, we have 2,300 members now in the Desert Blockchain meetup. We've got about 26 members that are Desert Blockchain citizens. I would say we've got a core group of about 50 to maybe 100 people that are, active in our Saturday sessions. And I think we have an awesome group of folks that are here in Arizona, and some participate remotely. But in addition to that, Alex, there's also the DWeb community. And if you're not familiar with DWeb, you go to getdweb.net, I think it is, and you can start to learn about the DWeb community. But the DWeb community, and like Juan Benet is part of the DWeb community, that's really the most powerful, that's where the most horsepower is in the world, in my view, that's moving forward with this decentralized realm. And there have been 3 events. In 2016 was the first Decentralized Web Summit at the Internet Archive. That was about 300 people. In 2018, there was the Decentralized Web Summit at the Internet Archive in the San Francisco Mint, and that was about 800 people. And then in 2019 was the DWeb Camp, which is about 400, maybe 500 people that went camping together on the Pacific Coast, about an hour south of San Francisco. And the DWeb community is basically comprised of the people that invented the internet, like Tim Berners-Lee, Invent Surf, and others, Van Jacobson, and the people that are inventing what's next for the internet, like Juan Benet, Bram Cohen, Vitalik Buterin, just amazing, amazing people. So I hope that answers your question, Alex, if you're still watching on live stream, but that's it. Oh, and I noticed we are at time, so I will end it there. Try to stay on time. Jim, Randy, thank you for your support, and thank you for participating. Everybody that's on the live stream, thank you, and everybody that watches the recording, thank you. And again, our next session will be a review of 2021 and a forecast on 2022, and that will be 7 p.m. on December 22nd, I think it is. And then this Saturday on November 20th from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. at Desert Blockchain Camp, which you see in actually outdated image behind me here at 27th Avenue in Georgia. We're going to be we're going to have a workshop on automated market makers, and then networking and so forth. And we have free pizza. So that's the biggest draw of all. So anyway, thanks to everybody participating. Your time and attention are valuable, and we want to make sure that these are worth your time. So thanks, and have a good evening.
Thank you, Jay.